Dr. Mark Changizi here with your Science Moment. Is the federal government coercing big tech social media to censor folks like us who are anti-mainstream narrative? Or is Twitter and Facebook and these various social media companies just choosing on their own without any pressure at all and with no blame towards the federal government? Are they just on their own censoring us as private companies? And of course, I've argued that even as private companies and public accommodations, they shouldn't be allowed to discriminate on the basis of sex, race, LGBTQ, and so forth, or political orientation as well. But setting that aside, is it the case that the federal government is responsible? Now, we've made a strong case. In our case, with Michael Sanger, Daniel Kotzen, myself, with the NCLA, the New Civil Liberties Alliance, with Janine Eunice, we sued the federal government. Our case was dismissed because of a lack of demonstrating causality. That's to say, they're saying, look, sure, the federal government is explicitly saying we're working with Twitter and Facebook and YouTube to identify misinformers and misinformation. And sure, we're working with them and saying here's the ones that we should be censored. And sure, we've also said things like, you're going to be open up for greater regulation and potentially more lawsuits if you continue to keep this up. And pointing out that Twitter and other social media companies might be responsible for the deaths of millions of people because of their insufficient censoring of misinformation. So, despite all of these, a shame if something was to happen to your beautiful legs kinds of mafia-like comments, there is the claim that there's no demonstrated causality that the federal government is causing Twitter to do this. And the same argument was made for half of Alex Berenson's case against Twitter, and that was dismissed. And the same was argued for Justin Hart's case against Facebook, all in the same week, which is highly coincidental. So, the more obvious side of this is, it's very mafia-like. If you're trying to show that the store owners in some particular street who are too afraid to say that they're being coerced, and you want to show, look, Vito keeps saying it'd be a shame if something happened to your beautiful storefront, and then they turn out to be giving gifts every month to Vito. You might want to say, look, there's obviously a causal association. You can say, yeah, but they might have been paying every month these gifting Vito these things every month. And who are we to say that these casual comments that he made are actually causally contributing to their giving him gifts? Now, of course, that would be absurd. You're unlikely to find an email and them discussing and catching, the store owners in discussion saying, yeah, we better pay because Vito's going to break our legs or break our storefront. And just like you may not ever be able to find recorded discussions at Twitter or between Twitter and federal officials that say, hey, we're going to go ahead and do what you said because we're afraid of these regulations that you threatened us with, or internal documents saying we're going to have to start doing this because we're afraid what they're going to do. There may not be such documents. They know, without ever even having to say, and certainly not having to put in writing, that they're doing it to protect themselves so that they are on the good side of the federal government. Now, this is on the one hand obvious, and I was just, I've been watching Morning Show, which is about the Me Too movement, and one of the things that we've gotten more heightened about and more sensitivity towards is the idea of imbalance of power over the last 10, 20 years, that if you're the boss of somebody or you have disproportionate power over them, then even if you are not explicitly coercing them, just the mere hinting at something, it would be sure nice if I was able to take you out for dinner tonight and take you home and show you my etchings on the wall, this kind of comment. And all I've said is it'd be really nice if that would happen. And of course, but if you're my employee, and then, this can amount to a kind of, if not coercion, maybe there's some word that's slightly epsilon less than coercion, that can be still argued as a kind of coercion that's causally inducing you, if you're my employee, to do that. And to the extent that I was saying it'd be a shame if something would happen to your job, that's now more explicitly coercion. We are much more sensitive about these things, and potentially, reasonably so, I think. I mean, there's some ambiguous cases you could argue over. we're sensitive to this thing. It's been discussed in a lot of contexts over the last 10 or 20 years. So the same thing happens here. We have someone of disproportionate power, even relative to big tech companies, even relative to Facebook and YouTube and Google and Twitter. The government is their boss. Has in this analogy, has the ability to hurt them, to ruin them, to break them up, to take away their liability protection that protects them from dangerous I might do something that they're not held responsible for the kinds of things that I or others might say, but you could say take away that protection. I can't remember the name of that clause, and generally just cause more regulatory problems at any time that they wish. So it doesn't take much for the government, just to say it'd be a shame if, or we're pointing, but they've done much more than that. They've gone out of the way to say, look, you guys have been really irresponsible because of you allowing, not censoring enough. And you're not censoring enough, and this has been extremely irresponsible. You're basically responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. And if you don't do that, here's these things that we're going to do. That's totally open on the table. We're going to take away your liability protection. We're going to take away, we're going to potentially break you up. So in what world is it that these things are not counted as causally, cases where they're causing big tech censorship by these big tech companies? I think this is like using sort of 1970s and prior kinds of reasoning. It's obvious that they are causing it, and there's a separate issue. Even if you believed that Twitter was going to do it, this is without the federal government and Facebook was doing it. This would be something like where somebody's going to shoot somebody, let's suppose, and someone else, Doug, comes along and tries to shoot them, but the person dies right before their bullet hits them, right? So the government is engaged in an attempt to coerce Twitter to do something. Now, if it turns out Twitter's already doing it, still, it's overdetermined in this case. The government happens to be causing Twitter and social media companies to engage in censorship. Now, even if it turned out they happen to be doing it, that doesn't take away the intent of the federal government to force bend the arms of social media companies to censor. And it's almost just a side case that happens to be that they already were going to censor. No, you were out there trying to engage in something that was unlawful, and it happened to be that somebody else beat you to it, but you were engaged in an unlawful attempted act, just like trying to attempted murder, but the person dies by somebody else's bullet before it even gets there. In no way in today's age can we look at a federal government that's twisting, using private companies to engage in censorship that goes against their narrative and just be laissez-faire about it. We need to push back on the federal government. Our case is going to go forward, and I'll tell you more about how it's going to go forward in the future. I presume Justin Hartz's, Alex Berenson's case on the First Amendment side, I'm hoping he's going to come back with that. And beyond that, once this is over, I believe that we need to have protected classes extended from sex, race, and so forth, and age, and so forth, to political speech of all kinds and political viewpoint. Society and truth and freedom depends on public accommodations, allowing everybody to be free to say what they wish. And that was your science moment.